Test. Great.
Test.
Hi, everyone.
Test.
Does everybody's mic work? Yep. Wonderful. We're going to kick off the panel. This is a conversation about regulations and blockchain. So we've got 7 panelists. We're going to do a rapid-fire introduction, and we're going to dive into some topics. Could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Anna Vladi, CEO of Everx. We do payments on Ethereum blockchain.
I'm Kevin Latinity. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Prime Trust. We're a regulated financial institution with a bunch of APIs to bank the blockchain.
Hi, everyone. My name is Esteban. I'm the CEO of TRM, and we help crypto projects understand their users and make sure that the people using their products are safe and trusted.
Caitlin Long, Wyoming Blockchain Coalition.
I don't know how to follow that, but Jared Olson, Wyoming House of Representatives and co-sponsor of all the blockchain legislation in Wyoming.
My name's Tyler Lindholm, and I'm also a politician. Sorry.
Hi. Can't really follow that, but my name's Emma Channing. I'm the founder of the Status Group. Through our affiliated broker-dealer, I'm a FINRA registered rep. With the 7 to 9 pursuing the 7, we structure and sell security tokens.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So the buzz of the day, the week, the conference is new legislation in Wyoming. Jared, can you tell us what's going on? Why is it important? Why should we care?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of activity in Wyoming. The main activity has been our special depository institution legislation, which basically creates something that hasn't been done since the late 1700s in the United States, and just creating a haven of activity that's going to occur in Wyoming for banking purposes, and I think all of you are pretty excited about that.
Tell us, what is it? What's the problem that this legislation solves?
I'm going to pitch it.
Yeah, please.
So the biggest problem with banking as it stands right now is the discriminatory aspects that take place. The banking industry is in large part discriminatory based on several pretenses that has to do with what type of individual you are and what type of business you are. And that's been an issue in blockchain industry, gun industry, on down the line. But on top of that, the federal regulatory agency, the FDIC, has been incredibly discriminatory in this regard. So the special purpose depository institution that Jared just spoke of completely rejects the FDIC. And that's the first time that's happened, I think, in any state. But also on top of that, it's 100% reserved. So we're kind of kicking Alexander Hamilton's gravestone a little bit with that one.
Okay, so when you say banking is discriminatory, I think people have a hard time getting mortgages, but I suspect that's not what you're talking about.
Yeah, so one of the biggest problems is in the discrimination aspect is the FDIC and Operation Choke Point, but it's been going on longer than Operation Choke Point. The FDIC has been discriminatory from, well, pretty much the outset.
To whom?
Well, any type of business that whatever executive order is passed down is they don't really like this type of organization. So take, for example, in 2013 when Operation Choke Point came out, the Obama administration wasn't a big fan of gun manufacturing or guns, period. So the FDIC and the Department of Justice teamed up and started closing those bank accounts based on FDIC security risk. The banks didn't really have a choice in closing down those accounts because their security risk was raised, insurance was raised, those types of aspects. So we've just decided in the state of Wyoming that if you want to bank with an organization that doesn't have to follow FDIC rules, that is now a possibility.
So, okay, please.
There were 30 different industries that the FDIC targeted. It wasn't just blockchain. It was a list of the politically incorrect industries: gaming, pornography, tobacco. It was a who's who of politically incorrect industries.
So today, a crypto company can open up a bank account in Wyoming with no fear of the FDIC intervening. Jared, you're a little shaky on
Well,
this.
almost. I mean, the legislation has cleared both chambers of the House. We're waiting on the signature from the governor, but we feel very comfortable in obtaining that signature. So, to come in the next week.
And then the rules have to be written, and then as of October 1st, banks will be able to apply. In fact, actually, Free Range is sitting out of the audience. Shout out to Free Range. They've been helping us get the legislation through. They're one of the applicants, and if everything goes well, the new special purpose depository institutions should be open in Wyoming by the end of March of next year. It's going to take some time.
Okay. Now, whose business will this impact? I know we talked a little bit about the trust business. Will this impact payments at all?
No, we're actually working with the current legislation.
Okay.
So we're being very creative. We're working with getting licensing with the states, money transmitter. We're also partnering with money transmitter entities. So the current legislation works for us. I'm going to bring a little bit different point of view in here. Because there's going to be legislation that will say yes or no to certain things, we actually right now are able to negotiate with some of the states, for example. They're very friendly to us, the state of New Jersey, for example. So it's going to be interesting how it's going to play out.
You're saying that you have negotiating leverage with the states because they want your business.
Exactly.
Interesting. Any other perspectives on how this is going to play out among the states?
I guess my question would be, and I think that's great that the states are playing ball. Me as a state legislator, we're definitely interested in the economic diversification aspects of this. But until the states have taken a stance of rejecting federal oversight, I don't see how they can even take that ideology into place. So until they reject the FDIC and set up legislation in that regards and put it in their statutes, there is no state.
Emma, are you going to be advising your clients to start operating out of Wyoming?
I think what we would say is our clients are security token issuers. The laws that our clients grapple with are federal tax, federal securities laws, federal banking laws. And the only way that a state could attempt to shield one of our issuers is by defying that federal legislation. But this federal legislation has very serious federal preemption. And, you know, it's not, this is one piece of it, but no, we would recommend that our clients comply with federal law.
Mm-hmm. So does this mean this is more of a symbolic gesture and a Wyoming tip of the hat to the FDIC?
I think what I would say is that state legislation pushing at federal level issues is a great show me argument for any of us in the blockchain industry working on the Hill trying to get legislative change. When I came into this industry 3 years ago, I was very much a Jobs Act fan. I didn't think we needed a change in federal legislation. I didn't think that needed any issue at all. I now come a whole 180 degrees. You know, there's nothing quite as humbling as being in the digital asset space. And I'd also say that the heavyweightness of the enforcement that we're seeing at a federal level really does impact innovative companies. Because, you know, I'm a tiny 10-person business based in Colorado. We face on to major investment banks. They have 200 in-house counsel to hand stuff to if there's a regulatory issue. It doesn't even touch the innovators. But if you're a 10-person company, if you're even a 1,000-person company, like, you know, people who've been speaking today, when federal level legislation bites hard on those companies, it's very hard for those innovators to think about anything else other than that enforcement.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's change gears off the Wyoming legislation. Kevin, you were telling me that your firm operates out of Vegas. Can you tell me about what it is about the vehicles that you create that make it conducive to do business in Vegas?
So if you look at the landscape of kind of trust regulation, Vegas and South Dakota kind of lead the way. And what we really liked about the Nevada banking regulations is that they're very open to innovation, kind of similar to what Wyoming's doing. And we had a lot of great conversations with the banking commissioners where they were very open to bringing digital assets. And as a trust company, what separates us from what people think of traditionally as a bank is while we can't engage in lending, we can hold other assets besides cash and including cash. So we've been able to leverage the Nevada regulations to offer custody of assets for asset-backed tokens like TrueUSD and a lot of the stable coins. And we've been able to help a lot of these disruptive blockchain companies deal with money transmitter regulations and things of that nature by offering really easy to integrate APIs for the engineering teams so that you can spin up a Prime Trust account for your end user, and then Prime Trust actually has that account and does all of the money transmission. So when we think about it in context of everything that's happening, we think it's a very complementary regulatory regime with a lot of what the other people are trying to do.
In what instances do you run into federal regulations that Emma just described?
We're not regulated by the FDIC, which is one of the main reasons we decided to do a trust company and not a nationally chartered bank. But we do run into a lot of other federal regulation. So we hold a lot of tokenized securities, and we do SEC qualified custody from the broker-dealer world, which has a lot of FINRA oversight and others. And we're regulated by the same kind of money service business type regulations that everybody else is federally. So for us, it's understanding where the line is and understanding how to walk the line with the regulators.
Caitlin, your thoughts?
Yeah, the trust company model is something that Wyoming rejected because the SEC, we had extensive conversations with the SEC, and the SEC doesn't consider trust companies to be qualified custodians in digital assets. So that's why we have a state chartered bank that can become a custodian. And the interesting thing about the state chartered bank model is that you don't need the money transmitter licenses because it's a Fed member. So we threaded some really important needles here and went into great levels of detail. I see Chris Land sitting here in the audience. He's the secret sauce of Wyoming's legislative drafting, who had all the conversations with the SEC. And because we now have the only bank license that is able to do digital asset custody, and you can avoid having to do the 52 state and territory money transmission licenses, a lot of new entrants can get into digital asset custody very quickly, and we have the enhanced digital asset custody regime, which is designed to have a bank, not a trust company, a bank, be a qualified custodian for digital assets based on the conversations we had with the SEC.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like my legal team would kill me if I didn't disagree on stage.
Please.
We've had a lot of conversations with the SEC as well, and we're extremely confident about our ability to custody digital assets.
Did they tell you you're a digital asset custodian?
We have some things that are inappropriate for me to talk about in a public setting, but we're extremely comfortable with our position, and we own a broker-dealer as well, and some of that stuff, and we're very happy from a regulatory perspective.
So we're saying, hey, it's going to be easier to custody digital assets, whether it be in Wyoming or Nevada or in Colorado. Who's asking to have digital asset custody? What does this mean to end users? What does this mean to people in the audience?
The only people who really need digital asset custody are the institutional investors and registered investment advisors who manage more than $150 million worth of assets. It's not individuals like any of us who ever should do anything other than custody our own keys. It's the institutions who by law have to use a third-party custodian.
Does this mean that we're all going to get rich because there's going to be a flood of cash going into digital assets?
Well, that's the idea. There are people paying for institutional investors like 401k plans. But having been an ERISA fiduciary in my prior life, the fiduciary standards for investing in this asset class are very, very high. And there's a reason why the only institutional investors who have come into digital assets like Yale and Stanford and Harvard endowment did it through a venture capital fund. They don't think there are qualified custodians for digital assets that are institutional quality yet. That's what Fidelity is trying to build. So there's clearly a land grab happening in this space, and there are going to be different levels. There are going to be those that service, the Fidelity quality, which is 401k, and then there are going to be those that service the family offices where maybe it's not an ERISA fiduciary standard, and then there are going to be those that are targeting individual retail who doesn't want to self-custody their keys.
Got it. Anna, you had a thought?
Yeah, I'd like to add something. So when our partner banks were interested in digital custody, we actually kind of turned the conversation around and said, why digital custody? Because they were looking at crypto lending, for example, as a use case. So we needed a stable token. So what we offered was, why do digital custody? Because all compliance, especially in the banks anywhere in the South, red flags go up right away. So what we offered them is a stable token that is collateralized by USD. They take custody of USD dollars and we put a stable token on the blockchain. And for us, that's a settlement mechanism for our payments.
Okay. So it sounds like the overarching effort here, though, is to make it easier for financial institutions to hold digital assets. Is that a fair assessment? That this doesn't necessarily impact the daily hodler of any sort. Okay. Esteban, go ahead.
If I can add one thing, I was going to expand that a little bit and say, I think for us, it's both digital assets and then it's also fiat currencies. Right, so if you think about blockchain-based companies, it's really, really difficult to get banking relationships. Part of it's the discriminatory nature of the FDIC. Part of it is just the risk tolerances of various banks. But when you look at kind of the banking system as a whole, you really have three institutions that have stepped up for crypto. Early, it was Silvergate Bank. Signature Bank's done some of it. And we saw a massive opportunity in the space to say, hey, we think it's worth the risk. We really want to work with a lot of these blockchain companies, and Prime Trust will throw its hat in the ring as kind of the third financial institution in the space.
Got it. Esteban, what does this mean for DApps and the kind of things that people are building here at this type of hackathon?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the people here today are excited about crypto because in the same way that the internet enabled this explosion of content, like we didn't have Instagram stories 15 years ago, and we didn't have YouTube videos and Medium articles. We believe that this technology is going to enable an explosion of financial products. And financial product is a very different, beast than building a video streaming platform. And that's why regulation is so important and crucial to what we do as entrepreneurs in this space. TRM, we build software that makes it easy for entrepreneurs to understand who their users are. An example of this would be a financial institution, like a custodian or a brokerage, an exchange. They want to make sure that they're compliant. And how do they do that? Making sure that people aren't using their product or service for illegal purposes, for money laundering or for market manipulation. And doing that's kind of difficult. So we have an API where you plug in, we monitor your network and just let you know if we see anything suspicious. And I think that type of product hasn't existed before. I think that's just one of the ways that blockchain is actually going to start transforming our existing regulatory framework because of the unique properties that it has.
So these properties are in the apps themselves, will make it easier or more difficult to identify users? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, so the properties are in blockchain itself, and new technology has actually impacted the way that we regulate securities in the past, and I think it's going to do it again. So blockchain is transparent. That means you can track the flow of funds. It's way easier to do AML monitoring. It's way easier to track money laundering on blockchain than it is in fiat. Regulators should love blockchain if you deal with AML. It's programmable. So right now, if you want to verify that someone is somebody, there's this entire KYC AML framework that is really cumbersome. But it's possible to actually program those qualities about individuals onto the blockchain. And now you've just made it so much more efficient to be making sure that someone is able to trade a certain security or not. So that's really interesting. And then I think regulators, we're dealing with a technology that makes it possible for anyone to do financial engineering. Like we are already seeing products that it makes it possible to create a security on the fly. I think we should be regulators should be creating legislation for a future where we have millions more securities than we have today, because the same thing that the internet did for content, blockchain is going to do for financial products.
I'd like to hear Anna's comments, but before we go into that, if you have questions for the panel, why don't you stand over here? I don't see any microphones out there, so I'll have to repeat your question into my mic. So line up now if you want to ask questions. We'll have about 5 minutes for Q&A.
Sasha?
I
Yes.
just want to ask, you mentioned AML and KYC on blockchain. Today that is not possible, right? So you're talking about off-chain.
Yeah, so today, today KYC AML basically means they check your identity, they make sure that you are who they say you are, and then they look at your bank and they make sure that you don't have like illicit funds. I know that's highly
That
simplistic.
is not on blockchain.
That's not on blockchain.
That is
That's off-chain. But what blockchain allows is you can actually have a wallet, and I can, on the blockchain, write, this wallet has passed KYC AML. Why, when that wallet goes and uses a different service, why should they do the same KYC AML check that they've already done? So I think the future of regulation should adapt to this world where you can program properties onto individuals on digital identities.
There's so many wallets that don't do that. Take MetaMask. It doesn't do
I
it.
think what Esteban's suggesting is that once you get onto the, once you ramp up onto crypto, then you can certify that these funds are
But
clean.
the wallet has to have the capability to do that.
Yeah, of course.
Right? So
Yeah.
that's the future. You're talking about the future.
Sure, I mean, and we're starting to see some stuff early right now. So why has the Bitcoin ETF been rejected over and over again? It's because the SEC says the markets are too opaque. We have market manipulation. We have no idea what's going on. We can use on-chain data to have a more transparent idea of what's going on in the markets. Like we should be detecting market manipulation on blockchain. We should be detecting things like money laundering on blockchain.
Yeah, but we're years away. You're talking like artificial intelligence on blockchain.
No, I mean, we do that today. TRM monitors, looks at on-chain data and exchange order book data and can tell you, here is insider trading.
Yes, but you do that off-chain. You pull the data from blockchain and you do that analysis off-chain.
Sure, we look at on-chain data and then we, apply a lot of machine learning and pull out patterns from it.
Caitlin, you have a point here?
Yeah, can I just throw in there? There are a couple other major regulatory changes that I'd like to make sure to highlight on this panel, because this group is going to be interested in knowing that you can issue security tokens, whether they're in certificated form or in uncertificated form, in the state of Wyoming. And Jared is the one who sponsored that bill. So we started talking about the financial institutions, but there's something that more directly affects everybody in this room, which is that you can actually, in the state of Wyoming, issue security tokens, whether they're certificated or uncertificated. Delaware in 2016 authorized uncertificated blockchain shares, but the ERC 884 tokens were not actually in compliance with the law. Now they actually can be in the state of Wyoming.
What does that mean, uncertificated?
Yeah, so the way securities are owned right now is we're forced into an indirect ownership regime with our securities. We don't own securities in our brokerage account. What we own is an IOU from our broker-dealer. We have a debtor-creditor relationship with our broker-dealer. We do not have direct property rights. One of the great things about blockchain is, of course, you can own your assets directly. So that enables you then, from a securities, if you're buying securities issued on a blockchain, they have to fall into one of two buckets, either certificated, where you actually, in the past, it was a piece of paper. Thanks to Jared's bill that was passed in the legislature yesterday, you can now electronically on a blockchain have the same information that would have been on a stock certificate, like a name and an address of the owner. That is now legal under Wyoming law. And so a token can actually take the place of a piece of paper that you directly own. Same thing with the uncertificated shares, where the stock ledger is held off the blockchain. That's what originally Delaware did, because they were going after the enterprise blockchains part of the the sector, and Wyoming reacted to the Ethereum community requesting us to have a place where you could legally issue ERC 884 tokens, and so we did that. I also want to throw out one other thing, which is the Uniform Commercial Code. This is one of those legalese kind of things that everybody loves to ignore and just hand off to the legal and regulatory folks, but Wyoming is the first state that actually clarified that you own a direct property right in your digital assets. No other state has done that. And I will say publicly for the first time, Wyoming saved what was an attack on this industry by the incumbents, which were trying to force digital assets into an indirect ownership model where the only way you got property rights in your digital assets is if you owned them indirectly through a securities intermediary. That would have been a disaster for a whole host of reasons, not the least of which there is no lender of last resort in these assets, and if the broker-dealer went bust, there wasn't going to be anybody to bail them out. So you want to force, thank you, you want to force an actual one-for-one relationship on digital assets, and in a Wyoming custodian, you're gonna get that. But very importantly, you have the right, just with the technology, you now also with the law have the right to own your assets outright.
Thank you, Caitlin. Let's take a question from the audience. Duke, shoot it out. What's more important, transparency or privacy? Why don't we just do like a vote, like left hand for transparency, right hand for privacy? Does that answer your question? I think that's a point of debate, Duke. Any other questions? Yes,
So
please.
I think that's a good question because there's a lot of debate in the industry around that. And I think the answer is it depends. There's some applications where we are going to have transparency, like securities on blockchain need to be transparent. There's some things where privacy matters, and there's certain use cases where privacy, we should be solving for privacy. And I think we see that with, like, you know, Zcash and others.
That's a great point. So dependent on application.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Duke's saying, what's a valid privacy case? He's saying, like, when should someone use Monero? Is that it? Duke, I think that's a broader conversation. We got another question back here. Where does insurance liability stand from a regulatory standpoint when we talk about blockchain? Is that a fair translation? Any thoughts? Anyone want to jump into the insurance conversation?
Yeah. Great question. So I think that's one of those broader applications that anybody has yet to get their arms around. But there's significant interest just from what we've seen in the state of Wyoming in regards to putting their arms around it and figuring out how the applicability works. I had the opportunity to speak with, every state has an association of insurers, and this is something that they're trying to figure out how that application works. So, if you know somebody in those association type groups, I would say reach out to them because they're reaching out right now, whether you know it or not. How it works long term, I guess that depends on this group. How do you want it to work?
So being worked at AIG for 3 years, the largest insurance company in the world, I can tell you right now that the first thing they're going to look for, make sure you have all the licenses in order. And make sure that you're actually on the regulation side, everything is okay. So
Let's do one last question. Any other questions? Yes, we got a man in the yellow shirt. Okay, so the question, I think, is that the ethos of this, the ethos of cryptocurrency is to get away from regulation. Therefore, why would we want this regulated?
I'll take that because there are two discrete systems at play here. One is the technology, and the other is the law. And none of us lives in a place where there is no law, unless you're on a seasteading ship or something where there is no law. And so Trace Mayer puts this really well, that the technology has to be backwards compatible with the legal system. And so you want the legal system to enable the technology, and you want to be in a place that the law's not going to restrict it, and actually is going to open the ability for innovation. One of the things Wyoming did also is pass a sandbox bill. So basically, anybody who's not harming consumers can come in and just do anything as long as they are complying with they have to give notice to the financial regulator, and they can spend 2 years, as long as they're not harming consumers and they post a bond, they can do what they want, and they can extend it for an extra year. And so that gives up to 3 years for an innovator who might run afoul of an existing regulation to come in and have a way to do it without the existing regulation. And I will give you a little bit of a hint, and it relates to the insurance question you asked earlier. Watch what Wyoming and Bermuda potentially do, because they have reciprocal sandboxes and also have digital asset custody relationship that we're talking about doing some work with. So we can do some very interesting things because we have a reciprocal sandbox, and because Bermuda is one of the insurance capitals of the world, they want to help Wyoming companies get their insurance, and we're going to be doing some interesting things with Bermuda. So keep an eye out for some news there.
If people have additional questions or would like to chat about this, will all of you be available off to the side here? Wonderful. So we'll keep the conversation going on off stage. Let's give a round of applause for our brilliant panel.
Hey, Sasha, can I say one thing really quick?
Yeah, please. Encore.
Right.
We've got an encore.
And what I want to put out here is, and we've heard about a lot of great states thinking about doing a lot of great things. They're not here. They're not sitting up on this stage. I'm a state representative, and so is Jared Olson. We've done it in Wyoming. So if you're thinking about moving your business, go to the state that's doing it. It's done. It's there in Wyoming.
I would like to point out. I would like to point out that Colorado is well represented on the stage. Thank you.